Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for wherever you're joining us around the world. Um, Today's webinar session is hybrid multi-cloud resilience for NC2 with HYCU and Nutanix. So let's dive straight in. Let's not wait around. Let's get into the topics. So myself, Chris Rogers, I'm a senior product marketing manager for HYCU, and I'm pleased to announce. Actually, Ashok, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Ashok. I'm a product manager at Nutanix for our Nutanix Cloud Clusters or NC2 service, and it's a real pleasure and privilege to speak to you all this morning, evening, or afternoon.
Amazing. Let's dive straight in. Let's not get too hasty. Right, so let's our agenda. So we're gonna do a quick overview of Haiku, of kind of who we are, what we do. Then we're gonna look at why customers are choosing hybrid multi-cloud, what hybrid multi-cloud is, the common challenges. And then we're gonna hand over, and we're gonna do an NC2 overview. And then we're gonna be reducing cloud TCO with NC2 and Haiku. And then finally protecting NC2 with Haiku, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So yeah, let's dive straight in. So who is Haiku? Well, you may not have heard of us before, but we're pretty well established in the industry especially for Nutanix data protection, right? So 4,600 plus organizations use Haiku to protect their critical data across 78 different countries, um, and with over 450 channel partners, trusting Haiku to protect their end customers as well. So global presence and been around doing this for a long, long time as well. And we have that industry recognition as well. So it's not just from us telling you how great we are, so we have an industry leading NPS score of 91. We've been in the Magic Quadrant Visionary section for the third straight year. And we've won multiple different awards from Google Cloud and GigaOM, and you name it, we've pretty much won it on that screen as well. So, and I just want to run you through a sample of Haiku customers. So they come from all around the world, as we've already discussed. They come from all different industries, all different sizes of organizations as well, from very, very small SMB all the way up to, top 10 enterprise customers in the world. And the biggest one, and the one that I've left out here, is actually Nutanix themselves. So Nutanix IT use Haiku internally to protect their critical workloads from failure. So if you can trust Nutanix with your data, guess what? You can trust Haiku with it as well, because Nutanix already do. Um, so we're going to move on to a topic now. What is hybrid multi-cloud? And Ashok, look, why don't you take this one? Because I think you'll probably be able to explain it far better than I can in terms of, so, what do customers normally say to you when you try to explain what a hybrid multi-cloud is? Can you give us a breakdown about what that actually is?
Absolutely. I think cloud is one of these goals that most of our industry now has in their mind. But what it actually means, what are the tangible steps that you need to take to reach it? Is it an end goal or is it part of your overall hybrid cloud strategy? These are all questions that come up very frequently. How do I go about this? What are the TCO implications of this? So I think the best way to sum this up is if we look at a customer example on the next slide.
Oh, I think the customer moved to the end, Ashok, but
Oh,
we'll come
okay,
back to the customer towards the
that's
end,
fine.
absolutely.
Okay,
And
let's
actually,
look. Let's
go on, you go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, then let's look on the next slide and go through, talk about some more of these challenges or frequent comments we get whenever we
Yeah.
bring up this topic of hybrid multi-cloud. Because as I said, there's a lot of it's a big word. It can mean
Mm.
many things to different people. So it's important to understand what are some of the complexities around it, what are some of the questions that come up around it. So if we go to the next slide, let's start there. So what hybrid cloud is, and most of you would already know this, is we have our private cloud and we have our public cloud. There's not a one-to-one mapping between the two. If we look, for example, over here, we look at AWS over on the right-hand side as public cloud, and we have our private cloud environment on the left. The concepts, the nouns, and the verbs that we use to put this together are different on both sides. On my on-prem side, I have different file formats that I may be using depending upon what hypervisor, what platform I'm using on-prem. Whereas in public cloud, there's also different formats there as well. In the AWS world, we use AMIs to deploy images. For storage, we may have VDIS, volumes. Nutanix has several different solutions that Haiku plays well into in backing up that we'll talk about. But I may be using some partner or ISV solutions for storage on-prem, whereas in public cloud, the hyperscaler has their own storage solutions like EBS or object storage with S3. Over on the Azure side, we have things like managed disks and Elastic SAN. And then when it comes to networking, a predominant number of customers use native networking. However, people are moving to software-defined networking. On the Nutanix side, we do offer something called flow virtual networking that I'll touch on a little bit later to help with these. So some of these constructs that you would see in a cloud world, like VPCs, subnets, security groups that you may be implementing at a hardware level, like at a switch level, can all be done from a central control plane at a software level. So how do I map these two together? I have a set of skills that I know how to do on the left-hand side in my data center in the private cloud, but now do I have to worry about upskilling or completely relearning all the tools that I need to administer this environment? And then I also have not just the solution itself, the hardware infrastructure, but I have a variety of different products, software products that I'm using in this environment. I may have third-party integrations. In this context of this webinar, HYCU. I'm using HYCU on-prem to back up my on-prem environments. Can I continue to use that solution in the public cloud? Ideally, I would like to, because I don't want to have to re-platform and have a completely different BCDR solution. And then networking and security. So again, I have network admins on-prem who manage all of this for me. What does this mean in a public cloud environment? When I move to these different constructs like network security groups and VPCs or VNets and gateway devices and NVAs, how do I manage all of that? Do I have to redo all my security policies? I would definitely hope not. And the other thing that can be concerned with is infrastructure. What do I do to make my solution in public cloud highly available? How do I ensure the resources are there for me? How do I make sure that I have the storage that I need, that I don't run into one of these hyperscaler capacity issues in a region? So there's a lot to think about when you're looking at a hybrid cloud adoption. And another thing I want to emphasize here is we could say hybrid cloud in the sense that public cloud is not a destination. It is another side of that hybrid cloud coin. So you will still continue having on-prem. You will still continue having public cloud when you adopt this hybrid cloud strategy correctly. And so the challenge becomes, how do I go between these two worlds of public cloud and private cloud seamlessly, maintain the same set of operations, maintain consistency of infrastructure so that it is very quick, it is very seamless, it is very robust, and it is very resilient. Next slide, please. So now once I figure all the previous slide out, what the infrastructure will look like, what my networking and storage will look like, how do I manage this going forward? So I've made the adoption of hybrid cloud. I've made the jump to public cloud. I have it in a consistent architecture with my on-prem environment. But how do I go about managing these environments? So cost is a very, very important topic when it comes to public cloud, because public cloud is not cheap. Depending upon what you're doing, a lot of times you may over provision. You have more resources than you need. On-prem, you may be able to get away from with this, but in the public cloud world, Amazon, Azure, GCP, they are charging you by the hour for whatever you provision. So whatever wastage or over provisioning has a very stiff financial penalty associated with it. So you want to make sure that your TCO is correct, you have the right size of resources, and you're getting the most utilization out of your resources. The other thing is a lack of transparency to resources. How do you manage all these network and storage objects in a public cloud when those are hosted by the hyperscaler? You no longer have as direct access over it as you would your on-prem environment. So how do you let go some of that control that you have on-prem, but making sure it meets SLAs, meets performance, meets security standards that you have on-prem? And on the bottom row, we've talked about in the previous slides about being able to maintain the same integration points that you have with other software solutions you may be using, like HYCU. You don't want to lose all of that just because you're adopting a public cloud strategy. You're doing so that you can extend your data center and all the software you use there to a public cloud environment. And on the same point as lack of transparency with resources, you want to be able to break down silos that you may have on-prem, areas where you may have very strict control over, letting go of that control and focusing on other aspects that are important in a public cloud world. Next slide. So let's talk about how Nutanix with our Nutanix Cloud Clusters or NC2 addresses all of these different issues that we've talked about. So these are the most common hybrid cloud use cases, and most of you have seen this. Many of you may already be doing this, but cloud migration. A lot of times we see customers who the reason they adopt public cloud is because they have to exit their private data center. They may be paying a hosting provider, they're looking at refreshing on-prem hardware, and in doing the analysis, it's actually cheaper just to migrate to public cloud. Disaster recovery, especially on our NC2 product, is probably the primary driver of a lot of our customer adoption. Customers may already have a DR data center on-prem, they may not. For those that already do, they may be looking for a tertiary DR site in public cloud. For those that don't, they're confronted with, do I invest in another data center, pay another hosting provider to use this? That's another question that comes up. So the solution there becomes moving to public cloud. On-demand elasticity. We see this a lot around the virtual desktop space. So what happens here is I need to do bursting. I may have some seasonal demand. For example, something like a retailer who around these holiday seasons. So I need to deploy additional capacity for my workloads in these seasonal bursts. I'm able to do so with public cloud rather than investing into on-prem hardware, which may not be very cost effective. And finally, cloud archive. So we want to be able to use public cloud to as a cold tier to be able to store archival data. And so that way I don't have to invest in very expensive or complex storage solutions on-prem. Next slide, please. Okay, so this kind of shows our evolution of our NC2 solution, which I'll talk a little bit in detail. So we started off originally with AWS. That was the first hyperscaler that we supported with our NC2 solution. Then we added in Azure about 3 years ago. And we're expanding to our partner ecosystem as well. When we talk about a little bit of licensing, payment, we talked about the flexibility, the ability to have this consistency of architecture. We talked about network storage, software. It also extends financially that any sort of financial implications that you don't want to do a 100% duplication of either your hardware or your financial commitments. You would ideally like to be able to reuse the two. So we have abilities for you through the marketplace, directly through Nutanix, to use existing licenses, to use existing credits you may have with these hyperscalers. That sort of financial flexibility is needed in addition to that infrastructure and software flexibility. And I mentioned on the previous slide use cases around DR and cloud migration, bursting. Cloud native is another emerging use case. We hear all the time about AI and how ML and DL and these types of emerging workloads. The similar sort of questions about, do I invest into a DR setup? Do I invest into spare hardware for bursting? The same questions come up around cloud native workloads as well. Do I invest in new infrastructure and capacity on-prem for cloud native? Or because this is dev test work to prove out this AI space for my business, does it make more sense to use public cloud for this? So we're seeing more and more of that. And when we talk about different products that Nutanix supports for this, we have NKP, for example, which I'll touch on a little later. And finally, we have our own files solution for that archival storage that I talked about. Okay, So here, this shows where we're available right now. We have many regions in AWS, about half of that on the Azure side, and we support a very wide variety of partners as well, hosting partners. For AWS, we'll talk a little bit more about what NC2 is it's a bare metal solution. What you are getting are bare metal hosts that run the Nutanix software stack and other software as well, such as HYCU. On that hardware, that bare metal hardware that we run on in AWS is already available worldwide. You can go and get these bare metal EC2 instances independent of a Nutanix or NC2 today. So there's much wider global availability there from AWS. On the Azure side, bare metal is something a bit newer in their space. They're not as far along their bare metal story as AWS is. So there are fewer regions it's available in and fewer metal types as well. However, Microsoft is very much a 50-50 partner in the solution for Azure, and they are very aggressively working with us to find out where the customer demand is for new regions and even new metal types. If we go to the next chart, you'll see that, okay, well, maybe it was a later chart. So this is, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I was gonna just mention that on metal types too, we have only 2 metal types in Azure, but we have shortly coming out, starting in the UK, we'll have a third type that's coming out based on Gen 9 Intel hardware. On the next slide, so this shows that whole consistency of architecture approach I emphasized in a hybrid public cloud environment. We have bare metal from Azure, we have EC2 instances from AWS, and we have our private cloud. Our NCP Nutanix cloud platform is the exact same across all three. So this really brings home that point about having the exact same software stack, frictionless migration between private cloud and public cloud, and not having to reinvest in any sort of re-architecting, re-platforming. In fact, when we really know we've hit our mark with the customer using NC2 is when they say, I don't really know that I'm running on AWS or Azure. To them, it appears that they're running on-prem. That's when we know that the story that we sell with NC2 actually works. So being able to quickly move from on-prem to public cloud, being able to use the same software products, whether Nutanix or otherwise on private or public cloud, using existing cloud investments, having a unified control plane. So the management tools that you use, our control plane, Prism Central, that you use to manage VMs and the life cycle of them is the exact same that you would use in public cloud that you would on-prem. Being able to integrate with the native networking in these public cloud environments and other resources like VMs or storage solutions. All of this is needed so that I can have that seamless migration across this hybrid cloud substrate. Next slide. So let's talk about some of the features we have here. So just-in-time scale and shrink. You're able to deploy a cluster. It takes about an hour in AWS. It takes a little longer, up to 3 hours in Azure, but it's all self-service, and you can add and remove nodes however you want. So when we look at, for example, skipping over to DR cost optimizations, I have the ability to where I can maintain a minimal DR footprint, just enough for my hot tier data. And then on a DR event, I can quickly scale out to match 100% of my production environment. And you can all scale up and down on demand whenever you want. You can do it yourself. You don't have to open minutes. It takes minutes to initiate the process from the portal. The other thing is auto host remediation. So you're paying the hyperscaler to use their hardware. So any hardware failures that are there, anomalies are detected, and a new node is swapped in for the failed node. Cost visibility and governance, it's very important. We talked about wastage and oversubscribing or underutilization of capacity. You want to make sure that you have visibility into that so you right size the capacity that you're using in a public cloud environment. And as I mentioned on the previous slide with our global availability, we have a very wide worldwide presence and we're continuing to expand. So this just-in-time expansion, as I mentioned, you can add and remove nodes as you need. For an example, a DR use case, this can be automated using our XPlay. So you can have different signals or alerts that you can set up that will add and remove nodes based on whatever the criteria you have are. Auto host remediation, as I mentioned, the hyperscaler monitors for any sort of hardware failures. They will be alerted to you. You will be notified of it. And then we do auto host remediation where the hyperscaler will swap out a node and orchestrate it with Nutanix software so that you don't have to worry about having a cluster that's running in a degraded state. Let's talk a little bit more about integrations because now that you're running in a public cloud environment, you want to make sure that you can integrate with other resources there as well. We have customers, for example, who might be running a database on Nutanix on an NC2 cluster, and they may have a web server that's running natively in a public cloud VM. We have customers that run virtual desktop instances on our NC2 infrastructure, and maybe the storage for that is running natively. Similarly, we want to have flexibility with different storage options. We want to be able to fit in seamlessly to networking storage as well. While I mentioned we have several different types that we support in the previous chart, in AWS, we have a more limited set of types in Azure. We do give flexibility on storage. So we already support in AWS the ability to add EBS volumes to the different metal types that we support to augment the storage that you have there. And then coming out in Q2 or around the June timeframe of this year, we'll have the exact same ability in Azure where I can add elastic SAN volumes to those metal types that we have in Azure. So therefore, it's like adding disks on-prem. So just the same that I could do on-prem, and this way also that I have the flexibility where I don't have to get new nodes when I need new storage. I can just add storage to existing nodes, which is a much more cost-effective way to gain more storage. So I mentioned that the seamless experience in hybrid cloud moving to and from private to public is there with our infrastructure, the software stack that runs on top of it. And I also talked about software as well. So on the left-hand side, you see all the different products that we have in our product portfolio. Some of the more important ones, since we talked about storage, are files, volumes, our database services or NDB. All of these are supported in our NC2 environment. There's a couple of outliers that we just have to do some qualification on, and those should be supported shortly. But it's also important to note that this is the same for ISVs. When you're using different ISV solutions, for example, Palo Alto, virtual appliances, you may be using those on-prem, and you could use those just the same with NC2. But I think this is a good point for me to pause and hand over to Chris because a perfect example of this consistent support for software and consistency in architecture is best illustrated by HYCU.
Amazing. Thank you, Ashok. Great insights there. So yeah, we're going to cover the ultimate protection for NC2 using HYCU. So what are we? Who are we? So we're HYCU. We're the #1 data protection platform for Nutanix workloads. So we have deep integration with Nutanix. We have Nutanix validated designs and blueprints. And if you look on the right-hand side of the slide here, you can see all of the different workloads that we support, including the NC2 on there as well. And what Ashok just mentioned there a minute ago, kind of like we don't really care that we're running NC2 because yeah, we support it and absolutely we support backing up and I'll go through all that stuff. But because the consistency of architecture, the consistency of platform is there from Nutanix, we treat it like any other Nutanix platform. Obviously, we have some integrations and different ways of working because it is slightly different. But essentially, from a user experience, they're not going to know they're backing up NC2 versus an on-premise Nutanix. So the exact same kind of synergy, the same story that Ashok kind of said there about, we know we're doing a good job because the customer doesn't know where they're running. The same for HYCU. We the customer shouldn't know they're running an NC2 instance of HYCU, for instance, versus anything else. And the last 2 points I wanted to mention here was our NPS score. So like Nutanix, you have an incredibly high NPS score of 91, and that is the best in the data protection industry. And we're also secure by design. So we're a very simple architecture. I like to use architectureless or zero architecture. You essentially it's a black box appliance, virtual appliance you just deploy into your Nutanix clusters. We pre-harden everything for you, and we meet all of the relevant, security protocols, DISA-STIG, FIPS 140-2, and the app common criteria. You name it, we can do it. We're very, very heavily used in the federal space because we have all of these secure certifications as well. And I want to run you through our principles for Nutanix data protection. This obviously applies to NC2, but everything we do at HYCU kind of bases upon these principles. So the first one has to be intelligently simple, and it's not just simple. As I mentioned here, intelligently simple. So simplicity, I can print out a very complex set of instructions, break them down into simple steps, and that's simple. That's not intelligently simple. That's just making a complex task a little bit easier to understand. What I mean by intelligently simple is that we do everything as much as we can for you. So you set up policies for your RPOs, your RTOs. You tell us whether you want something to be archived or copied or replicas, whether you want fast restore, whether you want to store things in this place, that place. Essentially, tell us what you want to tell us, and we do everything for you. So you don't have any schedules, no jobs to manage, all of those types of things, all policy based. So it's easy to use. It's very, very simple to maintain, effortless to upgrade. You don't really need to deploy it. It kind of just deploys itself. You build your virtual machine out and away we go. And it's super simple to size as well. And we are deeply, deeply integrated. So as I mentioned, Nutanix and HYCU have been kind of there from the start. We kind of pioneered the data protection industry for Nutanix. So we support pretty much everything there is, and we're deeply integrated across all of that stack. So AHV, NC2, ESX, files, volume groups, all the things that Ashok has just kind of mentioned there, HYCU supports plus even more, right? But we have zero impact. That's incredibly important. The last thing you want to do is cause impact by using backups, right? The reason that the backup window as it previously was is because people were having problems with their backups causing production impact, right? So we'd run them overnight, so things didn't break, or if they did break, people didn't notice as much. Well, that's not going to be an issue with HYCU because we have zero impact. We no stunning, no agents, and no additional hardware to deploy as well. And then things have to be seamless. They have to be seamless and effortless. Otherwise, we will not maintain our NPS score. So if a customer has a bad experience, that's going to, impact negatively on our score. So things have to work properly. They have to work first time, and they have to be easy to understand, easy to use. We don't want to have a 5-day course to learn HYCU. It should be a very, very easy thing to onboard and use. Obviously, we have to be secure. We've mentioned all the security certifications we have with DISA-STIG and all the rest of them. But when you start looking at things, things like immutability, offsite copies, isolated copies, validation of backups, all those things need to happen. We have anomaly detection built into the platform as well. So all those things need to happen to prevent cybercrime and make sure that your backups are bulletproof from ransomware. Cloud scale. So as we mentioned before, and Ashok mentioned, having that ability to burst out and scale out seamlessly, that's what we want to be able to do as well. So it shouldn't be the case we have to then re-architect something because we're going to burst, because that completely negates the point of bursting, right? If we have to re-architect and it takes 2 weeks to architect something new and deploy and build out, it kind of negates the benefit we're going to get from bursting. So actually, if it's super simple and easy to scale out, then we're going to be able to scale seamlessly with your production environment as well. Data control and data freedom, super important to us. Your data wherever you want it. And I think Nutanix have a very similar approach to this. And Ashok kind of mentioned that really early on in the in the presentation. You don't have the visibility or control if you think just put things into public cloud. Sometimes they're a little bit more hidden or abstracted away from you. Actually, when it's your data, you want to have complete control over it. So wherever you want to store your data and however you want to do that, you can do that with HYCU. We don't tell you where you can store your data. You can store it back onto on-premises in Nutanix objects, Nutanix files. You can store it on a Dell data domain. You could store it in Amazon S3, for instance, or Azure Blob Storage. Wherever you want to store your data, it's completely down to you. And of course, we have to be cost efficient. We want to deliver the highest performance, but also give you an instant return on your investment. So it's not something you have to run for 5 years to kind of get your money back, because it's all built around making cost optimized storage and backup storage. HYCU doesn't sell storage. We sell backup software. You choose your storage and you go from there. And like very similar to the NC2 use case we supported earlier. So cost-effective disaster recovery. So full support of NC2. We can use cloud object storage if you want to use that as well. And also, if you wanted to go natively into a public cloud as well as using NC2, or maybe you're running NC2 for your production, but you want to have a DR in a different public cloud, you could do that using HYCU as well. We also have cyber resiliency, and I'm going to come on to this in a bit more detail because I think this is probably one of the biggest things that I hear from customers running NC2 is how do we maintain cyber resilience in NC2 environments. So I'll going to go through it on the next slide. But also the protection of production. Well, that was hard to say. Protection of production NC2 workloads. So if we are running on production workloads in NC2, which multiple customers do, because it's a great platform, that seamlessness across clouds. Customers may not know they're running on NC2, but actually, if they are, we want to make sure those backups are running properly, and we can automate those as well. So if they have moved into NC2 for whatever reason, we using Nutanix categories, we can automatically back those up, and again, recover anywhere and store them wherever you want them as well. If you're running production in NC2, it may be the case you want to have your backups back down on premise, right? Maybe you don't want to store them in the cloud next to wherever you're running your production workload, so we can support that workload as well. So it's why I want to talk about the cyber resilience piece. So I like to use the 3-2-1-1-0 kind of rule. Evolved from the 3-2-1 rule, obviously, as threats evolved and the landscapes changed slightly. But essentially, 3 copies of your data on 2 different media types, at least 1 copy off-site, at least 1 copy offline and immutable with 0 backup errors. So how can HYCU help you with that? So HYCU can store multiple different copies of your data, so we can have multiple different copies in multiple different places as well. We can do that automatically based upon a policy. So we can replicate or archive based on a single policy. So you can choose that policy for all your VMs, and knowing that you don't have to set up different jobs or different replication pieces for every single virtual machine or every single piece of data you have protected at HYCU, a single policy can manage your archiving, your replication, and your backups. We can store on 2 or more different media types. Again, completely down to the customer choice here, but cloud native storage. We can work in Nutanix unified storage, which is their files and objects, Dell data domain, or even if you want to go on tape or virtual tape as well. Completely down to you to decide how you want to store that. Tape is making a bit of a comeback in the ransomware era, if you will. So if you want to have a copy on cloud native storage, a copy on Nutanix unified storage, and a copy on Dell data domain, and a copy on tape, you could do that using HYCU if you really wish. At least 1 copy off-site. As we said, we support multiple cloud sites, we support multiple on-premises locations, and we do that automatic archiving, as I've said. So it's completely down to you to figure out where you want to store your data, which copies you're having offline, which copies you're having off-site, and we can support all of that. So maybe you have your production on your production on premises, you replicate a copy into objects in NC2, and then you have another copy in Amazon S3 or Azure Blob Storage or Wasabi or something that's immutable and offline. And that comes on to the next one. Immutability is supported across most storage targets. If the storage targets support immutability, pretty much HYCU supports that as well. We can make it completely isolated and immutable. We can even do cyber vaulting with Dell data domain as well. And we can keep it offline with intelligent state tape storage as well. And finally, the last one is 0 backup errors. So typically when people have been doing this, it's okay, I'm going to do a restore once a week of my data, and I'll choose this test VM or choose a subset of VMs, and we go, yeah, perfect. But actually, we can do automatic backup validation based on a policy. So no one has to remember to do it, and it can be attached to any number of virtual machines you wish, or any policies. So you attach essentially a validation policy that says spin up this virtual machine, X amount of times, and report back to me whether it's successful or not. We also have then RTO assurance. So inside of HYCU, you'll see what your RPO is, which is pretty standard for most backup providers, right? Tell me how much data loss I'm going to have. But also in HYCU, we can do RTO. So we tell you how long it's going to take you to get that data back. And that is really unique to HYCU to be able to tell an organization this amount of data has changed, this how long it's going to take to recover from this backup target. And then building on top of that, we have real-time notification of any errors that happen directly in the place you want it. So using webhooks, we can put it directly into a Slack, into ServiceNow, wherever you want it, or wherever you want those kind of notifications, those tickets being created, whatever you want, we can put it exactly where you need it, not just on an email that's going to get lost in your junk folder. And then we can simplify the backup testing across all those workloads as well as normal if you needed to. So how do we do multi-cloud hybrid cloud protection with HYCU? Well, it's really, really, really simple. So if we have an on-premise infrastructure, maybe 2 or more sites, you simply deploy HYCU, and all of the services you can see on the screen, plus a few more that I couldn't fit on the slide here, you can protect all of those across into NC2. you can also then protect anything that's running in NC2. So any of those services that Ashok mentioned earlier that are running in NC2, you can protect those running HYCU as well. And you don't necessarily need to deploy HYCU in the cloud if you don't want to. You can do, but you don't have to. You can use your on-premise infrastructure and to pull the data down in from NC2 as well. And then if you want to, you can then store that into cloud object storage. So Azure, AWS. You could even use a Dell data domain, on AWS as well if you're a Dell customer as well. So you can start seeing how very simple, very simplistic this kind of deployment methodology is. And as we've been mentioning, we don't really care that it's running NC2, but because we have that unified management plane, we have a unified experience, the customer's going to have the same from NC2 and HYCU. It looks the same, it feels the same, we have the same level of support that we do from on-premise into NC2. So you can kind of just freely move and protect your workloads with HYCU and NC2 however you wish. It doesn't have to take too much effort. And that is the beauty and kind of the magic in NC2 and HYCU is that it doesn't actually matter. It's not actually a big step, and you can get that unified experience across the whole stack. And then we have some of our advanced integration as well. So we fully, Ashok mentioned that the hibernation piece earlier on the features. We fully support the hibernation. As I mentioned, we can automatically protect workloads based on Nutanix categories as well, and we can automatically validate those backup sets as well. We have the fastest possible recovery from any outage inside of Nutanix. So even if you're running NC2, we can store HYCU owned and controlled snaps on site on the Nutanix storage. So when you need them, they're there, ready to recover from inside HYCU, and you can recover instantly directly back into production. You don't have to worry about rehydrating or pulling it from backup storage. You can do it straight from the fast storage on the bare metal instances in NC2 as well. We can protect more workloads than any other vendor across the entirety of NC2. So that includes NDB, NKP, volume groups, AHV, ESXi on top of Nutanix. We can protect all of that and including all the workloads in NC2 as well. And then we can integrate with those native services that we've been mentioning as well. So if you want to use EBS or S3 or AWS IAM, for instance, you can protect all of that with HYCU as well. So it's not just about the Nutanix integration. We also have deep integration with the public cloud vendors on their PaaS and IaaS services as well. And we are secure and compliant. I've mentioned most of these before, so I won't go through them again. And I'm going to hand back to Ashok to kind of go through some cost efficiencies and some cost effectiveness that NC2 provides and some kind of examples about how that works. So Ashok, back over to you.
Sure. Thank you. So earlier we talked about how one of the important things when adopting public cloud for your hybrid cloud strategy is making sure you're making optimal use of your public cloud resources because you're getting charged by the hour for them. So one of the things is NC2 is a bare metal solution. So what you are buying from the hyperscaler, from AWS, from Microsoft, is you're buying bare metal nodes. So one of the things to consider when looking at going native versus NC2, we've of course talked about NC2, the benefits and having the consistent platform and software and solutions, but there's also, you have to look at cost. So one of the problems we see a lot is micro waste with a native solution. In a native, you have to get what they call t-shirt sizes or shapes. You have to have the 2 vCPU and 8 gig of RAM, or you have 4 vCPU and 16 gig of RAM, or these multiples of 2 like that. And so you may not want that. You may have a need where you need somewhere in between 2 different sizes. So you have to round up, so to speak, to the largest size that will fit your workload. And so then you end up with some wastage where you don't need all that extra capacity. You were just forced into that t-shirt size. Another thing to think about is storage performance. There's a lot of different storage options. I mentioned as an example, we use EBS as a way to augment storage in AWS, Elastic SAN, but there are many other storage solutions as well. You could do HDD. It depends on what sort of performance that you want. But with all of these, there may be certain cost implications as well. You have to pay for provisioned IOPS. Depending upon where your workloads are situated, you have to consider different latencies. And so there's a lot of performance implications you have to consider as well when choosing a storage solution when you're going native. And then you also have to look at throughput as well. So undersubscribed VMs, it kind of ties into the micro waste point that we made above there. So there's a lot of different the thoughts that have to go into making sure you're choosing the exact right solution, making sure you're making optimal use of your public cloud capacity. Whereas if you play the slide, there should be another, but yeah. So when we look at bare metal here, a bare
Oh, sorry.
metal box is yours. You are paying for the entire node. So you can carve it up any way you want. You don't have to worry about micro waste because you can create a VM size that exactly matches your profile on-prem. You can look at your utilization on-prem, like your CPU utilization. You can look at your storage utilization, and you can create a VM that exactly matches what you have on-prem. So you can right size, and that's part of the consideration when moving to public cloud is doing that analysis on-prem and making sure you understand what your actual utilization is, because that's the size of VMs you want to create on these bare metal hosts. The other thing is when it comes to storage performance, the way Nutanix works is we use software-defined storage. We pool all the local disks that are on these hardware nodes, and we form a storage pool out of that. So you'll always be getting NVMe class performance for that storage. So you don't have to worry about, do I have enough provisioned IOPS, or what is my latency? It is always very predictable the performance you're going to get because you're using locally attached storage. The next slide has another comparison. Just well, I'm not going to go into this. It was more just an illustrative view of the previous point, where if we look at the VM approach that we have over there on the right left-hand side of this, you see that there's a lot of empty spaces there where we're not making full use of the VM. So, sorry, on the right side here, you can see that there's a lot of empty space there where we're not using it. If we look at, for example, 17 and 18 on the right-hand side, those are VMs where most of that VM is not being used. Most of that capacity is not being used. So why are you paying for that? Instead, if we right size this, what we can do on bare metal nodes is we can have much greater density of VMs on these nodes and make much more effective use of the CPU and memory and storage on them. So,
Perfect. I'll take.
yeah.
Oh, sorry, go on. Go on.
I was just going to
I was
hand it
gonna
over
take
to
the.
you. Yeah.
I jumped the gun. Sorry, Ashok. My bad. I'm too eager to talk. So when with HYCU, we kind of go along the same thing. Cost effectiveness is key for most organizations. You probably won't find any organization on the planet that says, yeah, it doesn't matter about costs. Costs are fine, right? So if we're looking at compute, storage, and time, those three things. So from a HYCU perspective, we require no additional compute in NC2. So we don't actually take up any of your storage, sorry, any of your compute capacity that you paid for in that NC2 instance to run HYCU if you don't wish us to. We have a very small footprint to minimize our resource usage. So typically we have one virtual appliance to protect most of our customers. And that can scale out if you really wish it to, and scale up if you want it to get your ultimate scale. But essentially, very, very small footprint to cover your workloads. And again, we don't run any agents or proxies at all. So you don't have to worry about additional VMs being deployed or additional worker nodes being deployed at time of backup, or putting agents inside of every one of those VMs that again increases that buffer on those t-shirt sizes that potentially you might need. And storage, we can utilize cost-effective cloud storage, or we could put it back onto Nutanix on-premise, or we can use something you've already deployed in Nutanix unified storage. So again, you get to choose where you're putting your storage in the most cost-effective way. And we can also tier data to archive tiers automatically if required. And then our time. Time costs money, as we all know. It's intelligently simple to do, and I can't really explain exactly how simple in one webinar, but if you take our free trial or look at our demos we've done, it's so easy to adopt, so easy to use, and it looks exactly like Prism UI. We built it that way on purpose to make sure that when people are using Nutanix and they log onto a HYCU instance, it looks the same, it feels the same, so you don't have to worry about looking at the different buttons or everything else like that. Everything's laid out the same as what Prism is, so it's a nice simple learning curve. We could do automatic protection of those workloads as well to make sure we're not missing them, but also making sure that those admin time isn't spent manually going through and adding to backup policies, etc. And we have purpose-built workflows designed for Nutanix and NC2 as well to make sure that we're not wasting time or resources for something that's inefficient. And Ashok, I'm going to hand you back over for the licensing and billing part.
Thank you. So the way that the cost structure is with our NC2 solution is you pay the hyperscaler, Amazon or Microsoft, for the hardware. And then for the software, be it Nutanix software or HYCU, will be directly with us. And on the next slide, I mentioned previously about having that same flexibility we have architecturally, hardware and software wise, also on the financial end of things. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do the software for Nutanix or HYCU. The most common is bring your own licenses. As we've mentioned, you want to be able to reuse existing license, not duplicate the licenses you have and duplicate the cost thereby. So if you have licenses for Nutanix software today on-prem, you can reserve those licenses for use in NC2. If you have X number of licenses, a portion of that could be used on AWS, a portion of that on Azure. You can divide that up however you like. We also support on-demand consumption. This is more in that bursting or that DR case. Typically, what will happen is in a DR use case for your steady state cluster, you'll reuse existing licenses, the BYOL, or you'll buy new licenses. And then for that very small interval where hopefully this doesn't happen, but if you have a failure on-prem and you do have a DR failover to NC2, for that a brief moment where you need to add additional capacity, you would use PayGo for that. And also, Chris, do you want to mention anything about on-demand for HYCU?
No, I'm just gonna let it flow. People can read, and we'll just go to the next slide. And I'm conscious of
Okay.
time, so we'll make sure we get through all the slides.
Yep. And the license mobility, as I mentioned in my example before, it's across on-prem, AWS, and Azure. We don't differentiate licenses and say only these licenses can be used on Azure. You make that decision. You buy a pool of licenses, and you can determine where you want those licenses to be applied.
Yeah, amazing. And that's exactly the same for the Haiku as well. Again, some more synergy between the two solutions. Again, exactly as Ashok said, buy the licenses, you decide where you deploy them, right? No, you're not buying them for AWS or for on-prem. And then do you want to cover our customer story that was, I think it got moved to the bottom somehow, but
Yeah.
cover our customer story now.
It probably makes more sense here because this customer right here summarizes a lot of the points that we've made throughout this presentation. So this
Amazing.
was a customer that they wanted to get to a hybrid multi-cloud environment. That was their end state that they wanted to reach. And for this, the reason that they were looking at Nutanix is they basically want to run all their apps and data on any cloud, be it private or public, with that same seamless portability. As we've talked about, public cloud is not a destination, it's just one side of that hybrid cloud coin. So they wanted the ability to move to and from on-prem, and they wanted it to be very seamless. So their solution is comprised of many different pieces, and these are the same pieces that are there on AWS and NC2 as there are on-prem. So, for example, our NDB and our file storage, both things that HYCU backs up, those are things that they use on-prem and they also use in our public cloud environment. They're also getting started with our Kubernetes platform or NKP. So we talked about earlier some newer workloads in that cloud native space or even this AI space. That is also something they were interested in. So they used NC2 for that rather than purchasing more capacity on-prem. So all these different software pieces under the solution, as I mentioned, no change whatsoever. It's the exact same software that they ran both on-prem and in public cloud. They were able to find by adopting NC2 that their TCO was reduced 30% than going cloud native. So that definitely is very important there. And because they're using the exact same set of tools and software on-prem and public cloud with Nutanix, they had very quick deployment times. They were able to provision VMs very quickly. And so that was the end state that they were looking for. So this was one customer that really all of the previous value prop that we've talked about with NC2 all are summarized by this one customer. And this is our real validation point. I mentioned earlier when a customer says that I don't know that I'm running on Azure or AWS. I just know that I'm running on Nutanix. That's when we know that our NC2 solution and our hybrid cloud strategy is working.
Amazing. Yeah, absolutely amazing. So yeah, I'm just going to pop back into this slide for a minute. So you can understand how Haiku is the #1 data protection platform for Nutanix. When we talk about all the things we've spoken about around NC2, but even that customer, then you look at that customer, they could only back up, using NDB using HYCU because we're the only data protection vendor that supports NDB currently. When you start looking at all these different things, NC2 and Nutanix as a whole is not just about virtual machines. They've got the files, the objects, the NC2 piece. So suddenly it starts, this whole ecosystem needs protecting, and that is in our DNA. It's in the HYCU blood that we support as much as Nutanix as we possibly can to make sure every single Nutanix customer can back up everything they need to. And then if you are a Dell customer as well, so you can use NC2 and back up that data to a Dell data domain using DD Boost as well. So any of that on-premise data, as I mentioned, can be stored in a Dell data domain, but also in a Dell data domain in public cloud in NC2. So if you're a holy cloud, you can go through there as well. And it's hyper efficient backups. We don't need to worry about the storage space or the storage efficiency because the data domain is going to be doing that for us. So in time, we're just going to whiz through these ones a little bit. So, and when we look at, we've spoken a lot about on-premise infrastructure, but as Ashok's spoken about kind of next gen workloads. So modern cloud and apps and services. We can directly look into Amazon EC2, Lambda, S3, AWS parameter stores, all those types of things that people are using. We can back those up as well. And then we start looking at modern cloud services and SaaS applications. We're actually the market leader in the amount of SaaS applications we support for data protection. And again, you can protect those back onto NC2 objects or even back out down onto on-premise object stores as well. So things like iManage or Jira, all those types of things there, you can see on the slide, that's just a subset of them, but protecting your entire modern data estate and not just infrastructure. For data protection for Nutanix and beyond, so we can discover and visualize your data estate. We can help you protect all workloads with secure bulletproof backups. We can recover applications and data in one click to no matter where you want to go, including NC2, as we've mentioned. And you can move your workloads anytime and anywhere. So on the screen here, obviously you get a copy of the slides, and I think we're going to drop them into the chat in a second as well. But you can learn more. So we've got some the product pages for Nutanix here about NC2 and some more customer stories. If you wanted to take a test drive of NC2, you can do that through Nutanix, and they also give you a 30-day NC2 free trial as well. So we'll pop those in the chat. If not, on the follow-up, we'll put them in as well. And also, if you want to try HYCU for free, you can do that as well. So you could do a free trial of NC2 plus a free trial of HYCU, combine them together and see the power of that real hybrid cloud come together. So on that, I'm going to say thank you and thank you, Ashok. If we've got any questions, let's have a look in the Q&A. Let's have a quick look. I've got a few questions here. Let me just look through them. So actually, we've got a question about licensing again. So can you just cover that just one more time? I know we mentioned on the slide, but we maybe went a little bit quickly. So could you just run through the licensing for NC2 just one more time?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we have on licensing, so I mentioned that the software portion of the NC2 solution is you would pay to Nutanix. And so the way we do licenses is we have what we call our NCI or Nutanix Cloud Infrastructure License. And so what this is it's based on cores. So depending upon how many cores your cluster has, for example, if you have a 3-node cluster, that's 108 cores. So you would buy a license for that. And it's the same on-prem. You would the same NCI license. We don't have any new licenses on NC2. So if you have that NCI license on-prem, let's say you have an NCI license for 500 cores existing today in your on-prem environment, you could reserve 108 cores worth of that license for Azure. And then what happens is when we look at your consumption, we just go and check and say, oh, look, you have 108 license worth of cores reserved. So we'll just use that to apply towards your NC2 cluster. The same also applies to our EUC licenses for virtual desktops. The same for NUS, our storage solution. So all of these licenses, you can either buy through a partner channel, you can get directly with Nutanix, and they're also available in the marketplace. So for example, in Azure Marketplace, if you want just one place where all your invoice and billing happens, and so you would prefer to just do everything through Azure, maybe you have Microsoft consumption commitment credits that you can use towards this. Perfect. Okay, then you can get your licenses through the Azure Marketplace as well. So there's some flexibility flexibility, not just in terms of bringing your own license with license reservation, but also where you obtain the licenses as well.
Amazing. Yeah, another synergy that Nutanix and HYCU have, obviously. Again, we can license on cores or virtual machines or whatever else you want to do. But again, we can purchase through Marketplace as well. So again, you can burn down those commitments in AWS and Marketplace with the whole solution. So, you know, the Nutanix piece and the HYCU piece as well. And then the last question I'm going to take for the interest of time is what are the requirements for Elastic SAN in Azure? I know you said that's coming, so maybe you don't know the exact or you can't tell us, but that's the question
Yeah,
that's been
sure.
asked.
Actually, if we go to that slide,
Oh yeah, hold on.
yeah, that might be a little easier to illustrate over there. Yeah, that's a very timely question, and actually, that's a good question for me because I own more of the Azure side of things on our team, so I can speak more to Elastic SAN. Um, oh,
Was it? Where was it?
yeah,
Where
it
did it?
comes up a little bit later under
Yeah,
flexible configurations. Yeah, I think in the slide. Yeah, there. Okay,
that's the one.
perfect.
There we go.
Thank you. Yeah. So on the AWS side, the way that we connect to EBS is over the Nitro card. But what we do is we don't have that sort of same fabric in Azure. So initially, we are going to connect over vWAN. So what's going to happen is the CVM, if you're familiar with Nutanix architecture, will be an iSCSI client to the Elastic SAN, and it'll connect over vWAN. However, we are also in parallel working on a solution using accelerated connections. If you've heard about that recent development from Azure, we're going to use something called a floating NIC that we'll be able to use to connect to Elastic SAN private endpoints. So the short of it is initially it'll be over vWAN. Then we'll move pretty soon after we GA this feature to using a floating NIC solution. And what happens is all you do the user model, you specify how much additional storage you want. So maybe you want 40 terabytes per node additional. Under the covers, we'll provision an Elastic SAN and we'll carve off a number of volumes based on what our performance calculations are to get the max IOPS. And then we'll just assign those volumes through the CVM to the VMs.
Amazing, amazing. Oh, I think we've got a few more questions. We'll get back to you if you have asked a question and we haven't managed to do it, but I want to make sure we wrap up and be conscious of everyone's time. So, Ashok, thank you very much for joining me. It's been super informative for me and hopefully everyone else at home. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to either of us, LinkedIn or wherever else you might, or our emails. But thank you very much, and then hope we will see you on the next one. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.